So I want to go ahead and give you an update on the new Iran talks. Now, the fact that we're even having Iran talks, it's a little absurd because the whole thing is a farce. I'm going to explain to you how the talks with Iran have been a farce and the U.S. has been stunningly dishonest. But first, let me give you the update, and then we'll dive into that. So here we go from Yahoo News. The United States hit out at Iran on Friday, saying nuclear talks between the Islamic Republic and world powers had stalled because Tehran does not seem to be serious about returning to the table. Hilarious that they say that. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned that Washington would not let its adversary prolong talks while continuing to advance its nuclear ambitions and would pursue other options if diplomacy failed. The rebuke came as diplomats paused a seventh round of international talks aimed at reviving the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, with U.S. and European participants voicing concern after 5 days of negotiation. Quote, what we've seen in the last couple of days is that Iran right now does not seem to be serious about doing what's necessary to return to compliance, which is why we ended this round of talks in Vienna, Blinken told a virtual conference of world leaders. But the window is very, very tight, because what is not acceptable and what we will not allow to happen is for Iran to try to drag out this process while continuing to move forward inexorably in building up its program. All right, so let me break this down for you guys. There's a lot there, and clearly the tone from the U.S. is, it's Iran's fault, blame Iran, blame Iran, blame Iran. They're not serious, whereas we, on the other hand, are very serious. Okay, so in 2015, they negotiated this nuclear agreement with Iran. What were the terms of that agreement? It's very simple. The idea is the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency, they get to go into Iran and basically keep an eye on their nuclear program, their nuclear system. Now, you say, well, hold on now. Why do they even have a nuclear program or a nuclear system? Well, under international law, every country is allowed to enrich uranium, namely for power for their power grid for their people, and also for any sort of scientific research that they might want to do. So they have a right under international law to do that. So the deal was the IAEA would go in and monitor and regulate the Iranian nuclear program. And they're only allowed to enrich up to a certain point. It's the point before you can actually make weapons with the nuclear technology. And in return for the international community basically keeping Iran in check with their nuclear program, the U.S. would lift our sanctions on Iran. And we've had crippling sanctions on Iran, I think, ever since the 1979 revolution. So what happened back then? We need to give you this context in order to understand exactly what's going on today. So in 1979, there was an Islamic revolution in Iran. The Islamic revolution came as a result of a dictator, the Shah, had been in power in Iran for a long time. And the Shah, on top of secularizing and modernizing culturally Iran, what he also did was basically let the U.S. and the U.K. almost steal gas from Iran. We had very cheap oil and gas coming out of Iran because of our deal with the Shah. The Shah was basically a puppet dictator for the West, and what happened was one of the few places where the people of Iran could organize against what they viewed as a repressive government and a government that's the puppet of the West was mosques. Mosques were one of the only places that weren't monitored regularly by the Shah. And so that's why you had this Islamic revolution come out as a result of it in 1979. And of course, culturally, Iran moved in a very conservative direction. They're, of course, Shia in Iran, and so you have this effectively like a Shia theocracy that was set up, and you have the Revolutionary Guard running the country. And so it was in part conservative culturally was the revolution, so women had to now cover themselves and whatnot, but also now economically, they were trying to sever ties with the West, not give the West cheap oil anymore, not be a puppet of the West, and sort of develop on their own. And of course, the U.S. in response to that said, you're not playing ball with us, therefore sanction the shit out of them. So now fast forward all the way to 2015, it was John Kerry and Barack Obama and the Obama administration made this deal. And by the way, it was a good deal. I think that was one of the best things that Obama did. Hey, we're going to lift the sanctions on you and you can trade with the world and your economy will flourish, but we just need to make sure you're never going to create a nuclear weapon, and that's why the IAEA will check. Now, what happened? First of all, the U.S. violated that deal very early on. We didn't lift all the sanctions. We kept some of the sanctions in place. But then also, Congress voted at one point to add more sanctions onto Iran when the only portion of the U.S. deal that we had to uphold was don't sanction Iran. So we violated the deal. Then now they still stayed in compliance even when we first violated the deal. It's amazing. Now this was under Hassan Rouhani, the more moderate president. Then So now there was an election recently. Rouhani's out. Now you have Raisi as president. Raisi's a hardliner. Now, we warned you when this happened. When Donald Trump fully pulled out of the Iran agreement. Fully pulled out of it. And they have all these conspiracy theories on the right. They were giving them, cash. We were giving them cash off of airplanes, this repressive dictatorship. No, we're giving them back their own money that we had stolen from them, going all the way back to 1979. It's their money. It's their money. So Trump gets in there, pulls out of the agreement, and we warned you. You know what's going to happen now? The moderates are going to get wiped out because they look stupid for making a deal with the West and trusting the West at all to uphold our end of the bargain. And now the hardliners are going to win. So because we're so tough on Iran by violating our agreement, you made it so that now you have hardliners in power in Iran who are much less likely to ever play ball with the West and who can easily, in turn, raise tensions along with Israel and the United States and say, fuck off, we're going to go it alone because we don't trust you. So Trump pulls out of the agreement. In comes Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden, when he's running for president, what does he say? We're going to get back into the Iranian agreement. Wonderful. That's the answer. If you have a U.S. government that comes into power and they say, look, our bad, the previous guy was an anomaly. He shreds these international agreements, and our word as the world's sole superpower is only as good as us abiding by our agreements. Therefore, like Paris Climate Agreement, we're hopping back in that. Hooray. It's crazy that this guy ever took us out of it. That's what Trump did. This Iranian nuclear agreement, we're going to hop back in. And by the way, if you're going to get back in it, the other thing you should say is, we apologize. The last guy was crazy. We're going to uphold our agreement, and our bad even for violating it early on. Let's stick by it to the letter now, and we assure you there won't be any further problems. Biden runs on getting back in the agreement. Then he gets in office. He doesn't get back in the agreement. He doesn't get back in the agreement. What? It was the easiest layup for the Biden administration. He didn't get back in the agreement. So he continues Trump's policies on it. Now we're having talks to see if we can revive the agreement. And part of our condition for the talks is, okay, Iran, now you go back to abiding by the agreement, and we're not going to do it unless you show us that you're abiding by it again, and then maybe we'll jump in and uphold our bargain and lift some of the sanctions. What? So we violated the agreement. Then we pulled out of the agreement. Now we say, as part of our new round of talks, all right, you get back in the agreement and we're not going to do it yet. Why would they get back in the agreement? Why would they do it? They would be insane not to enrich uranium now. They'd be insane not to do it. Now, by the way, what else does Iran know? They know what happened with Gaddafi in Libya. Gaddafi gave up his weapons, and then the West said, thank you very much, and then we toppled him soon thereafter. So, in other words, the weapons were a deterrent to the West going in there and doing anything. Kim Jong-un, same shit. Why would Kim Jong-un give up any weapons if he knows, hey, when somebody gave them up to you guys before, you went in there and toppled them immediately? So, for North Korea, for Libya, for Saddam in Iraq, like, the whole idea is, well, as long as I have a deterrent to Western aggression, I'll be okay. So we're mad that Iran is enriching uranium when we violated the deal, we pulled out of the deal, and now we're at the table for talks, and we say, so you go back to abiding by the agreement, and then maybe we'll follow after, but you got to do it first. This is lunacy. And now, by the way, again, you're dealing with a hardliner government. You're not dealing with Hassan Rouhani anymore. These aren't the moderates anymore. So they're not going to be talked out of that shit. And so that gets us to where we are today. Because the U.S. didn't get back in on day one, which Biden should have done, and because the U.S. is being absurd with these negotiations, well, now it's certainly possible that Israel tries to bomb some Iranian nuclear facilities, which could spark an Iranian response, which could lead to a broader war. The U.S., by the way, I haven't even brought this up yet. The U.S. Brought in a new round of sanctions under the Trump administration. We were even sanctioning medicine going into Iran, which the International Criminal Court said, you're not allowed to do that. You have to stop. And we said, no, sorry. And so here we are. And now it's hilarious that the U.S. is saying to Iran, let me read the quote for you one more time. Tehran does not seem to be serious about returning to the table. We left the table, then we overturned the table, then we lit the table on fire, and now we're going, why don't you want to return to the table? What table? What table? You destroyed it. So, and guys, there are far-reaching implications for this as well. Apart from just the peace angle of it, that now we're much more likely to raise tensions and much more likely to have some sort of conflict over this, the U.S.'s word means nothing now. It means nothing. You can't craft this agreement and then we fuck it up and pull out of it, and then what? The next time you make another agreement with another nation, they're going to say, we don't believe a fucking word you're saying. Now, contrast that with China that's doing the Belt and Road Initiative everywhere. They're going around and saying, we're going to build your infrastructure, we're going to give you guys more material wealth and well-being, and we're going to make these economic deals. Now, really, it's empire through debt is what they're doing, but they're sticking by their word, number one, and they're giving people some material benefits, number two. It would be a miracle if China doesn't become the world's sole superpower in the next 50 years compared to the U.S., because the way we act is wholly irrational and psychotic on the world stage. This is psychotic shit. You crafted the deal, violated the deal, pulled out of the deal, said you were going to get back in, didn't get back in, and now you're chastising them to get back in the deal and saying, maybe we will, maybe we won't, after you do it first. This breakdown that I'm giving you right now is the breakdown that you should be hearing in CNN, that you should be hearing on MSNBC, that you should be hearing on the nightly news. They're not going to tell you any of this shit. They're just going to give you the quote from the State Department, and that's it. They'll give you none of the context, none of the information, none of the history, and so then people don't even know what the fuck's going on. You have to come here to get an accurate picture of what's going on in the world. And I'm just an asshole on YouTube with a microphone. It is unconscionable how terrible the media is at covering this stuff. It's unconscionable how the U.S. is acting internationally, and nobody's saying it. Share this segment far and wide, please. You know, every now and then we cover these stories that are just really substantive, and unfortunately the way it works on YouTube is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You guys like it much more if I'm doing some segment on fucking Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder or Alex Jones, and it's conflict-driven, and it's that sort of stuff. That's what sells more on YouTube. This stuff I'm telling you guys right now, unfortunately, does not generate the views. Part of that's because of the algorithm and they try to suppress us, but there is a genuine issue here from the audience perspective that it just doesn't, it's not as sexy. People don't want to click on a video about Iran and foreign policy nearly as much as they want to click on one about personal conflict and debate. But this is important, and people need to know this stuff. So please share this stuff far and wide. Support the show if you can. This is unconscionable. It's crazy. And it's incredibly disingenuous, too, and disgusting that the U.S. is acting this way. Get back in the deal, formally apologize to Iran, and look, get us back in a place where we're not escalating with every fucking country around the world and on the brink of war when we already have 70,000 other problems that we're dealing with. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.